Hello, my name is Osha, and continuing with my discussion regarding an analysis of the Iran war. So the conflict started on February 28th, 2026, with the joint Israeli-U.S. decapitation of the Iranian leadership and the assassination of the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Since then, he's been succeeded by his son, um, Ayatollah uh, Bushtaba Khamenei. And of course, recent intelligence reports, which is of course unclassified, has indicated that Iran is not at risk of regime collapse. Right? There's no uh, risk of or danger of regime change or collapse in Iran. The Islamic Republic is entrenched, and they have control of the government. Um, in any event, what I want to do now is continue with my comparison and analysis of of the ongoing conflict. So, in terms of casualties, there's been massive losses, needless, deaths. Again, by the way, to as a disclaimer to clarify, I'm not in support of terrorism or any acts of terrorism. Um, I'm an American citizen. Now I'm doing this because I'm a humanist, so I'm reporting this. I analyze history. I analyze U.S. presidents. So obviously, I'm analyzing the actions of an incumbent president. That's number 45 and 47. This is, of course, a pivotal moment in U.S. history because we have a history of going to war. Since our independence in 1776, uh, America has been at war for 93% of its independence. Right. Incidentally, we're going to be 250 years in a few months on July 4th, 2026. So we're going to be 250 years. And for most of our history, we've been at war in some form of conflict or the other, requiring the use of our military forces 93% of the time, over 93% of the time. So it impacts not just taxpayer uh, uh, resources, limited resources, because it's taxpayer money that funds our military and these wars. But it also affects, our reputation, right? There's reputational damage that's done when we're engaged in a needless war, especially since we're the aggressors in this case, right? Even Switzerland, a neutral nation, has come out and said United States violated international law and might be committing a war crime. When it decapitated the leadership uh, of Iran on February 28th, 2026. Of course, political assassinations are illegal under international law. They're prohibited, and also, you have to have reasons for going to war. Jus et bellum, justa causa, just cause. America didn't have that. Justa causa is self-defense, and the United Nations has actually come to the defense of Iran, saying it has a right to defend itself against the aggression by uh, uh, the United States and Israel, right? So self-defense is justa causa. So, and the current Iranian supreme leader has indicated that he's not inclined towards reconciliation, that they're inclined to avenging the loss of their leadership, the deaths, the aggression. And by the way, I don't know if people realize that even though America has imposed sanctions on Iran and labels Iran as a rogue nation. That's just propaganda wars between nations. Iran is a recognized sovereign state, right, in the United Nations. So it has its rights to govern its own people. Another nation cannot come and try and effect regime change, right? That's against international law, right? It's against international law. external nations are not supposed to infringe on internal political affairs. So, how Iran governs its people, it's up to the Iranians to make that decision. If they want to overthrow their government, that's up to the Iranian people, not the United States. We don't let foreigners come and overthrow our government in the United States, so we shouldn't be doing the same in a foreign region as well, right? That's the golden rule, right? That's just the golden rule, right? You should do unto others what you expect others to do to you. And so America has violated that principle. That's just in any event. What I'm going to do today is look at the data, the numbers, and try and keep this video quick. In terms of numbers to date, in terms of casualties, I'm relying on the data I gleaned from a combination of Time, New York Times, Reuters, and Al Jazeera. So so far, Iran has suffered the most casualties, right? About 1825 deaths, about 1,825 deaths since the start of hostilities on February 28, 2026, which includes 175 young girls killed when the joint U.S.-Israeli forces struck a school in Tehran. So, and over 12,000 have been reported wounded in Iran, mostly civilians. About at least 1,300 of these deaths and casualties have been civilians, because America and Israel have engaged in a carpet bombing, right? The carpet bombing of Iran. They've bombed oil refineries, which have caused the explosion of oil, and this emission and propulsion and suffusion of toxic chemicals that in the air. So it's made the air in Tehran and in Iran, at least those regions, territories that have been hit, it's caused the air to be suffused with toxic chemicals that reporters have said are carcinogenic, right? It will have long-term implications in terms of causing cancers and deaths later on. So that's like they've accused America and Israel of engaging in a chemical warfare already. So you can bet if America were to put troops on the ground, I'd seen a video by a senior CIA analyst who indicated that their previous analysis was that Iran possessed, or was at the early stage of possessing, chemical and biological weapons, right? So you can imagine that, well, they're going to do it eye for an eye. They're going to retaliate, right? That's what they will intend to do. So if we send American boots on ground, apart from the fact that that terrain, right, it's very favorable to Iranians. That terrain, it's mountainous, that region, it's protected Persian empires, previous Persian empires, for millennium and centuries, right? Even the Roman Empire couldn't breach it, right? And so they had to keep the Parthian Empire kingdoms, the Parthian Empire, previous Persian empires. They had to keep their region as a boundary, as a marker, demarcation of the Roman Empire, because it's very hard to breach. Iranians are 93 million people, so they can just keep drawing on manpower to fight a war of attrition, right? America is coming from far away. America is relying on military bases, which Iran has now given an ultimatum that they should expel Americans, right, from these military bases in the GCC countries, in the Gulf area, in the in Iraq, and these are now under attack. In Turkey, these are now under attack, right? Because Iran is able to wage an asymmetric warfare through its axis of resistance. Its axis of resistance include its ability to draw on allies, other Shia Muslims, right? Their supreme leader. So Iran is the base, the headquarters of the Shia sect of Islam, Shia Muslims. And this includes there's small groups of Shiites in Iraq, Hezbollah, right? Hezbollah in Lebanon. They've been waging this war. There's the Houthis in Yemen. Um, uh, by the way, the second largest group of Shia Muslims population is in Pakistan, right? And Pakistan actually has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Although last year in June 2025 or so, the a general uh, in the a general in the Iranian military had indicated that Pakistan would come to the aid of Iran should Israel use nuclear weapons, and Pakistan would supply Iran nuclear weapons. Um, the Pakistani government has disavowed this. Now we don't know how the sincerity of that disavowal, considering it has to keep a good diplomatic image because Pakistan is on friendly terms with the United States. But note that the second largest population of Shia Muslims are in Pakistan, and they see the supreme leader of Iran as their religious leader. By the way, the supreme leader of Iran is not just a political leader; he's also a religious leader of the Shia sect of Islam. Um, Iran, of course, is a theocratic state. I think it's the only theocratic state in the world now, at least major country. So let me continue with the casualties. So Iran again has about 1,825 people reported dead, are said to be dead. That's an estimate since the conflict, and about that's Iranians, and about 12,000 injured. For Lebanon, because the Hezbollah, the allies of um, of Iran, they're fighting Israel as well. They've been sending strikes against Israel. Of course, they've been hit as well. 594 people have been reported dead in Lebanon. 594 people, and they have suffered hundreds of people. Hundreds of people are reported injured. Um, for Iran, again, the wounded are said to be over 12,000 injured so far. And then there's Israel, about over 18 people reported dead. The estimates for Israel is unclear because, again, they say that they're underreporting. They might be underreporting. But anyway, so far it's over 18 people have been reported dead in Israel. And they have, in terms of injuries, over 2,557 people have been reported injured. The severity of their injuries is unclear. The United States is said to have lost between at least seven soldiers so far because the Iran has been hitting military bases in the GCC countries and in Iraq, right? So in the Persian Gulf area, U.S. military bases. Um, so at least seven, between 7 to 9, it's estimated. 8 people are severely wounded. 8 American soldiers said to be severely wounded, and about 150 are said to be injured in total. So lots of losses. So you can see Iran has lost far more. But from the comments and the reporting, it is estimated that Iran is sort of winning in long term. Let me just mention that the number of casualties, right, when it doesn't necessarily indicate who's winning the war. In the US Civil War, the Union forces lost more people, right? The Union forces had 20% more deaths than the Confederates who surrendered to them. In the Second World War, the Allied forces defeated the Axis powers. The Allied forces were the United States, China, Great Britain, France, and who else? The United USSR, right? And the Axis powers were Japan, Germany. Italy pulled out early, and the other smaller powers. But importantly, the Allied forces, right, had 85% of the deaths in the Second World War were suffered by the Allied forces. 85%, right? So the Allied forces lost more people, far more people. In fact, in the USSR, about 24 million people died from the USSR. For China, 19 million people died. The United States, we lost about 450,000 people. They were mainly soldiers, right? Because the theater of war in um, was in Europe, and apart from the initial attack on Pearl Harbor, when Japan, attacked a U.S. base um, in 1941 on December 7, 1941. Apart from that initial strike by Japan, the subsequent losses were suffered by U.S. soldiers when they shipped to Europe as a theater of war. So we lost about over 400,000 Americans, about 450,000 Americans died. But 85% of the deaths, of the losses, were suffered by the Allies, the victors, and the Allies, were the victors. So the fact that Iran is losing, there are more people dying on the part of Iran doesn't mean that they are actually losing the war, right? So they can end up winning. It's their ability to replenish their losses, right? And again, it's their nation, their territory. They have 93 million people there. They have their axis of resistance, these various groups in the region that support them. So they have ability to keep replenishing. And then the other thing is, remember I talked about the Pyrrhic victory. So even though King Pyrrhus, he won those battles, but the Pyrrhic victory said, one more victory against the Romans, right, and we will be utterly ruined. So it's like a victory that ends up in a defeat, right? Because it costs the victor so much in terms of resources. They don't have the ability to replenish, and it ultimately ends up in defeat. So in America, right, there's a war of public opinion. Public opinion is very important for America, right? U.S. presidents, for the first time, I've never seen it that at the start of a war, the public opinion was not in support of the president. When we went to war, the Gulf War, right, in 1991 against Saddam Hussein to expel Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, the president had 90% approval ratings. In the Iraq War, Iraqi invasion of 2003, right, when we said, Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, even George W. Bush, the number 43, had between 70 to 90% approval ratings. Right now, over 60% of Americans are against this war. They're against this president, right? Even people, members in his party, people are typically hawkish. Well, maybe because the president hasn't defined his goals appropriately. The other thing is, it was a war of aggression, right? They've been using this euphemism, a war of choice, right? There's nothing like a war of choice under the law, in international law. It's, you either go to war based on self-defense, or some kind of something unconscionable, something that shocks the conscience is going on, or in self-defense, right? They're rules of law, jus ad bellum, right? For justifications for war. There's no war thing like a war of choice. Americans, we sort of, our media makes up, just needless. I think they should use more lawyers, right, for people who are trained, who focus on laws, more in journalism, because I don't know who came up with war of choice. There's no such thing as a war of choice. There are laws, because in the end, the consequences after wars are fought. Remember, after the Second World War, there are the Nuremberg trials, right, when people were put on trial, right? They use laws. They're laws of conflict, right? They're laws of armed conflict. So there's no such thing as a war of choice. It's a poor use of words. Misnomer, war of choice. So America is in a war of aggression. It's an illegal war. It's in a war of aggression. I want to stop this video here, and I'll continue with my analysis. There's certain things that I wanted to cover. My name is Osha, and I'll keep you posted.